So this is a long form video. We're talking about what belief even means. And again, we've talked about this a million times. We're trying to do something new. And I feel like we are getting somewhere, but it really is meta philosophy. We really are trying to figure out what philosophy was and is. We're talking about how beliefs form in your head. Why do you even hold them? What is the process you go through when you say you believe something? And are you telling the truth? And the biggest question, watch this short video, is is that in some sense innate, or is it gathered from outside of you? Do beliefs come automatically, or are they choices? So those are really interesting questions that I don't feel like are enough of the philosophy conversation. That's why we're doing it. That's why, in some sense, we might get somewhere, even if that somewhere is exploration and inspiration rather than some kind of particulate fact. So we're going to talk about three things. Is belief philosophy? Is that the whole business really? Is that what epistemology is? Is that where we're going? And then the second thing is what I just talked about. Is it built in? And then the third thing is philosophy itself? This is another meta philosophy question, but is philosophy itself, especially when you're talking about these deep issues like belief or the thing like belief, is it character or content? In other words, is it the thing you do in philosophy? For example, when I'm teaching and I crack a joke, does it matter what the joke is about, or is the fact that it is a joke, the process of telling the joke? We're going to get back to that. Number one, is belief the fundamental discussion in philosophy? And does it define philosophy? So we've talked a million times about how philosophy is almost impossible to define. I used to tell my students 16 weeks from now, you're going to be asking the same question. So it's not going to determine your grade. You're not going to have a clear cut answer to what philosophy is. But is this question of how a belief forms, why you hold it, where it comes from, all these questions, is that discussion the key one? Where I'm going to end this video, hopefully in a little bit, on the Socratic style. What was Socrates doing? How did he feel about belief? And that's directly tied to this idea that it is, in some sense, all of philosophy is about the process of belief. And Socrates' answer was very, very different than the one we have today, unless you're a Stoic Socratic philosopher, maybe that understands this on another level. So number two, is it built in or discovered? We already talked about this. And again, is it philosophy or science? Do you have to argue with yourself for that belief, and then do you choose to hold it over another option? Or is it mandatory? When it comes to you, does it form a belief in you that you then may argue against and come up with a substitute belief, maybe wrongly because that original belief had a different character? And so that would be where we would go with that is, does some originating innate believing capacity, does that hold some precedence and some value over and above choices and mathematics about these things? When I say math, I just mean we do a lot of calculation. We come up with, this is what I believe. And is there a difference between those two things? And is one better than the other? Or is one just have a priority and you can do both, but one really needs to be the focus? And so I guess as a social philosopher, as a Socratic, Stoic, common sense philosopher, I would say that there's something to that. There's something to this idea that it's automatic and innate, just like in perception. When you perceive a tree and you know it's real, rather than having to argue about whether it's real. And that's two very different things, and I get scientists don't understand that first one. The third thing is philosophy style or content. And I've had whole long videos on this one. Go watch it. They probably have really cute hooky titles. I'm getting better. I promise you, I am. Come subscribe and send me a bunch of money. But what is the business of philosophy? Because we don't know, and we're using science to determine the business of philosophy. It may lead us down some roads that we may get stuck on, which don't really help us understand this. And the question, of course, the overarching question I keep getting is, does it matter? Who cares? What? And this is what Reed said. He said if we ignore the innate concepts, if we ignore the automatic universalization of some of these things that Kant ended up talking about and pretended he didn't get them from Reed, if we do that, we're going to lose everyone. Everyone's going to say, why does it matter? when if you'd had another timeline and philosophy had been more successful and had stayed around and had evolved and done these things, we may be more engaged in it the way people were in the 18th century. So is philosophy character or is it content? And so again, what I was saying was if I'm lecturing to a class of students who have no clue what I'm talking about because their parents are religious nut jobs that told them everything's black and white, but then nothing's true, in addition to the black and white, because that's how America works. If their parents had told them that, they're very resistant to the idea um, that there is a philosophy or that it should matter or that there's an exploration to getting to these things. So is it character or content? So if I tell a joke in that class, what effect is the joke itself having? Not the content. Let's say the joke is about my ex-girlfriend, where there were tons of those, and those girls were in fact jokes. But the joke about, that's not true. Don't get me in trouble. The the point I'm making though is that the joke can have content, the ex-girlfriend, but can also be a joke. And so is the fact that there's humor, there's joke, there's paradox, there's irony, is that all part and parcel of the exploration? And again, perhaps the more valuable element. So again, you could call this rhetoric. You could go back to Shaftesbury and you could see how the Earl of Shaftesbury talked, or at least wrote a lot. In his spare times, he's rich like David Hume was. Would you, John Locke's student, by the way, if he talked about how satire and um, ridicule were these really important components of the stylistic elements of philosophy. So when you're talking about something like belief, which is tied up with this whole thing, do we believe in certain ways because of style or because of content? Does one lead to a better belief or a less important belief? And how do they merge together? And how do they work together? And so again, we're in an exploration phase more than anything. I don't even know where we're going at this point. That's why this is unsystematic, which was going to be a whole other chapter. I just couldn't incorporate it into this video. So Socrates really believed that people woke up knowledge in other people. He did not believe you held content knowledge. He believed you held innate, kind of built-in structured knowledge, which means the infrastructure for knowledge or the infrastructure for fundamental questions. And so conversation for Socrates was the key. So again, an action, almost a rhetoric. You know, people talking, not what they're talking about, actually awakens this process that was then called philosophy. And so that philosophy conversation that was built in, like Reid would call it a framework, something on which you hang facts and data and even atomistic scientific truth. But that framework itself is a focus, and maybe this is where phenomenology is going. If you're a phenomenologist, I feel sorry for you, but if you were, maybe it is about looking at that framework. But then do you need to talk about what that framework means? And to talk about that, we need to talk about belief. And so Socrates believed, in some sense, these beliefs were automatic because they came from an innate thing, and they came from a system which was built in. And so this was very Greek. A nature to be commanded must be obeyed. There was a big Greek component in this. But I want to leave you with that. I want to leave you with how I, in some sense, started with Socrates, got distracted by phenomenology and existentialism and everything else became hypercritical, and then returned back to Reid's common sense, which is much more Socratic and Stoic. Go read Michael Billig's book. If you don't read Michael Billig's book, you don't know what I'm talking about anyway. You think I'm a crazy person. Thanks for shopping.